esta ocasión, el webinar que vamos a atender es el servicio de validación de IFC, de Building Smart International. Y nada, sin más, este es un pequeño disclaimer del tipo de datos que vamos a compartir durante la sesión. Si queréis tener más información, podéis acceder a través de este QR a la información de Building Smart International al respecto. Y para poneros un poco en contexto de hecho, de la serie entera de webinars técnicos que quizás ya habéis participado con anterioridad, este es un poco una forma de simplificar los distintos flujos de trabajo del marco openBIM, donde pues ya sabéis que es un compendio de distintos estándares y servicios, pues desde I10, del cual ya hemos hecho más de un webinar, IFC, BCF, los archiconocidos, ¿verdad? BSDD o el entorno de gestión de casos de uso. En esta ocasión vamos a ahondar en el servicio de validación, que, como veis, aunque está situado aquí en una zona de este diagrama, de hecho se puede situar en el intersticio de la conexión entre distintos estándares y partes de los procesos. Esta es la serie de webinars que hemos hecho durante 2024. Estamos ya finalizando el año. Empezamos el año con el servicio de gestión de casos de uso. Continuamos antes de verano con una segunda sesión, dado que ya habíamos hecho uno anterior de introducción, uno más avanzado sobre IDS. Y después del verano arrancamos curso, digamos, con una sesión de enriquecimiento de contenedores IFC con el uso de BSDD y su conexión vía API. Y en esta ocasión, como decimos, servicio de validación IFC. Recordad que tenéis en el canal de YouTube del chapter todos estos vídeos compartidos, ¿vale? Para su revisión. Aquí tenéis el QR de acceso a los mismos. Y, bueno, más que anunciaros, por si no erais conscientes, hemos generado una nueva sección también de forma homóloga como lo ha hecho el chapter, de hecho, Building Smart International también, una sección en la página web de Building Smart Spain, dedicada en exclusiva a los recursos relacionados con IDS y también con el servicio de validación IFC. Y estad atentos porque ya estamos finalizando la planificación de la nueva serie de webinars técnicos para 2025. Así que, bueno, tendremos nuevo material para el año que nos está esperando. Y sin más, esta es la agenda de hoy. Bienvenida, que ya nos la ha dado Sergio, mi introducción. Vamos a pasar ya directamente al servicio de validación, en el que, como os comentamos aquí, podéis, así nos lo ha dicho el ponente, podéis interrumpirlo en cualquier momento, podréis preguntar. Digamos que, a diferencia de como en algún otro webinar hemos hecho, en vez de dejar las preguntas al final, que si las hay, pues perfecto, la cuestión es que esto puede ser lo más interactivo posible, ¿de acuerdo? Y nada, ya a un minuto de finalizar, pues nos despediremos y hasta la siguiente. Sin más, vamos a presentar al ponente de hoy, Evandro Alfieri. Él dice que se va a autopresentar, con lo que no voy a gastar ni un minuto con esto. Así que nada, lo dejo en tus manos, Evandro. That's on your side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can see my screen, the one with the presentation.
Just a
Yeah.
second.
It's okay.
It's okay. Okay. So good morning, everybody. As you probably understood by now, this part will be in English. Apologies for that. My Spanish is not existent. Sorry. I'll briefly walk you through the agenda for today, but the main important part is probably the first slide. I'm happy to take questions at any point. So Sergio and David will help me with the chat box. So feel free to type your questions or just maybe raise your hand if you can. But I'm happy to take questions at any point. We also have time at questions at the end. But really, let's make it an interactive section. Quickly about me, I'm Evandro Alfieri. I'm Italian, as you probably will tell from the accent, living in the Netherlands, and that's the funniest part of the webinar. I'm not a software developer, And this is important because in the context of today, I'm going to present a web platform, so a software, but I'm not a software developer. I am the product owner, the product manager of this service, this IFC validation service, and I work with a very nice team of expert software developers. I'm also leading the IFC Implementers Forum. It's not important for today, but just for give a context, I'm leading this group of software vendors that are gathering together to discuss the implementation of the IFC for the true standard. This is also to tell you that I have a little bit of experience on IFC. And yeah, my background is half architect, half engineer, which means I'm none of both. So please consider all these things when we go through this webinar and through your questions. That was about me, and then I have a quick one about you, because I have a quite rich deck of slides, but I don't know which one and how much emphasis to put on the different parts. So I'd like you to take a moment to scan this QR code or go to menti.com and insert the code that you see at the bottom of the page. And we will have a quick 2-3 questions for me to better understand who you are and level of the knowledge so that I can fine-tune the presentation. I have the session open here somewhere. So hopefully you can see the results live. There is a first question that is mainly to make sure that everybody joins the Mentimeter. Again, if you were not quick enough to scan the QR code, just go to menti.com and use the code that you see on the top of the screen. First question is just to make sure that everybody joins and are able to use Mentimeter correctly. A couple of fun questions. I'm happy to see that everybody will happily trade the lunch for an extra hour of sleep, even though it's 10 a.m., at least here. So it's not that early. 17, 19. I think we're around 40, 50 people. So I'll give you a couple more minutes to get here. I just go ahead with a couple of questions and everybody will have the time to catch up. I'd like to know what's your background. And forgive me if I have not included your specific role. You have a last item called other. Feel free to use other and maybe type in the question box what others means, and apologies if I left you out. Okay. Architects and engineers leading the way. Don't know if it's a good or bad sign. Okay, 20 people. I see 50 in the call and 20 here. Again, if you didn't manage to scan the QR code, you can always go to menti.com and use the code, the number that you see on the top of the screen, and you will be able to join this session. Okay. Then a fairly generic question. How familiar are you with IFC and openBIM in general? It's a very open question that goes from openBIM what, which means you have close to no idea what these terms means or are, which is also fine, and going to moderate and expert. Okay, glad to see a lot of experts. Okay, 25 is the threshold, so let's skip to the next one. Okay, it's good to know that there are no newcomers, not because it's bad, but because I can skip some of the basics. Now it's more into the topic of today. How familiar are you with the IFC validation service? The basic one is, I know it exists, but never use it. The middle one is, I used it once or twice. And the last one, I use it every day. Okay, so IFC and openBIM are solid foundations. IFC validation service, I should probably start from the very basic concepts. Okay, then this is probably the last one or quasi last one. if you can choose only one topic to be further explored today, what this will be. You can choose between basic overview, a live demo, the software architecture and the technology stack of the validation service, the role of the validation service in the openBIM workflow, or the roadmap of the validation service and the future plans of the validation service. So if you can pick only one topic to focus on, what this will be. Okay. Live demo, live demo, live demo. Okay. I've extracted, live demos are sometimes challenges because you never know. So I did a demo yesterday and I grabbed some examples. We can also try to do a live demo today. The fun part is that yesterday the service was down for half an hour due to some technical issues. But we'll give it a try today and see how it goes. It's live, so we're excused if we fail. But definitely that's the most important part. So I'll try to cover the basics, at least enough basics to get you through the live demo, and probably I'll skip software architecture, or I'll be very quick about that and basic overview. Okay, I'll try to adapt the speed to these wishes. Thank you. Oh, that's the last one. This is an open question. I would like to understand for you, what is a success factor today? You are happy about this meeting, you're satisfied. What do you define success? How do you define success for this meeting? Yeah, I guess that's the correct attitude. I learn new things. It's already 2 times. Okay, include the service into the daily workflow. That's a good one. Understand the service report. Yeah, that's a challenging one, but I feel you. Knowing a little more, if it's useful for you, okay, good stuff. Able to apply tomorrow, or you can apply today if you want. Understand the workflow, we'll cover that. Okay, applying. Okay, so let's have the objective that everybody by the end of the meeting knows at least how to upload a file on the validation service and where to look in terms of results. That's probably the biggest achievement. Okay, well, very good answers. Thank you very much. I think I know a little bit more. Let me go back to the presentation. Okay, so I'll spend some time on the IFC validation service overview. Just to give you enough basics to understand the examples and the demonstrations. Then the role of the IFC validation service in the openBIM workflow. These appeared a couple of times in the Mentimeter, so I'll spend some words on that. Progress and roadmap, I'll mention it. If you're interested, feel free to type a question in the chat box, but I believe that we can dedicate more time to the demo and the examples. So first thing first, what a validation service is, quite simply, is an online platform. So it's a web service developed by Building Smart, and its job is checking IFC files against the IFC standard. You will understand in this presentation, hopefully, that against the IFC standard is probably the key word. Okay, we will explain what this means. Okay. It's a web service, so it's available at validate.buildingsmart.org. You can try it even now if you want. What it does, how does it work? Quite simply, there is a very basic user interface where you can drag and drop your file. Then your file is, let's say, scanned by the IFC validation service, and it's checked against the step syntax, the IFC schema, excuse me, other normative rules, and industry best practices. Don't worry if you don't know what these are. We will touch on each of these. All these things, all these layers, if you want, all these layers are checked in your files, and you will get a judgment in the form of a report for each of these items that looks more or less like this. On the left, you have the file that you have uploaded. Then the first column is the step syntax, schema, normative rules, and best practices, industry practice. So you see the 4 columns corresponds to the 3 in this case. There is an extra column for BSTD that there is an extra column for what is this industry practices that it's not reported here in the bullet point. Should be another bullet point, point D, best practices, and I'll explain what these are in a minute. So but most importantly, I'd like you to understand what the validation service cannot do. So what's the end of the mandate of the validation service? First thing first, the validation service does not check case-specific requirements. So all external walls must have a certain property. There must be 3 alignments in my file, 2 for the road and 1 for the bridge, or all objects must have a name. These are case-specific, can be project-specific, can be national-specific, can be your company guideline-specific, okay? But these are case-specific requirements, and these are not checked by the IFC validation service, because remember, the IFC validation service check your file against the standard. And the standard, the IFC standard, does not tell you anything about the things on the right, okay? It's not case-specific. It's a generic data exchange standard. Another important thing, for various reasons, the IFC validation service is not a viewer, does not visualize your model, okay? It's going through your file, trying to detect errors, and shows you the errors that it has detected in your file. Okay, it doesn't visualize your file. Sometimes it's also impossible to visualize the file because there are some errors that prevents visualization altogether. Another confusing point when I talk to people, the IFC validation service does not check your file, your IFC file, against an IDS. Do you remember 2 slides ago when I told you the IFC validation service does not check case-specific things? Well, case-specific things, it's really the scope of the IDS. You already had the webinar beginning of this year, no, before summer, on the IDS. So hopefully you understood what the IDS is and how to use it. So for case-specific requirements, and IDS is your tool. So there are commercially available tools. You can check out at the link here. There is a list of tools that supports IDS, and these tools supports the check between an IFC file and an IDS file, the requirements into an IDS file. So the IFC validation service does not do that. It's again out of scope against the mandate of the validation service. Another thing that the validation service does not do, I should say at the moment, is auditing IDS file. This is not checking an IDS file against the IFC, but this is really checking an IDS file against its own schema definition. So making sure that an IDS, it's a valid IDS. So this is similar to what the validation service does for IFC. We don't care about the content of the IFC file. We only care to check the IFC file against the IFC standard. So this is a similar thing. There is a tool developed by Bill Nismar. It's called IDS Audit Tool that is meant mainly for software developers to integrate into their own application. And these tools allow us to check an IDS file against its schema and implementers agreement. So basically it tells you that the IDS file is a legit IDS file. So at the moment, this is not done by the validation service, but there are plans and there is a discussion to include these IDS audit into the validation service. So, because the principle is the same, you will have the opportunity to land on the validation service page, and then you can check if you want to audit an IDS or audit an IFC file. Again, regardless the content, regardless the use case, specific requirements. These are out of scope both for IDS and for IFC. That's the core of the validation service. I was asked to present a little bit on the technology, but I understand that's probably too much for today, so I'll just mention it briefly. So the four checks that we discussed about, the step syntax, the IFC schema, the normative IFC rules, and the industry practices are handled in this way in terms of technology. The step syntax, which is basically the syntax that is used to write an IFC file. Okay, you know, it's derived from a ISO standard 10303, it's called the step standard. And there is a step file parser developed used by IFC OpenShell, and we use this module to parse the syntax of the file. So to really make sure that the syntax is correct, something that usually the users don't care or don't bother with, but it's essential for a file to be a legitimate IFC file. Then the IFC schema itself. You know, the IFC standard comes with a schema and the specification. These are two different things, and they are complementary with each other. So the schema, again, is an express schema, so using the same syntax of step. And this schema is checked by IFC OpenShell, using IFC OpenShell. And then you remember I told you the standard comes with two parts, the schema and the specification. The specification is the HTML, the long list of descriptions and requirements that are, let's say, attached to the schema. These informations are not part of the schema. They complement the schema. These are the 800 pages documentation that you can find online. Let's say the inconvenient part of a text documentation is that it's very difficult to read, or at least very few people go through the entire documentation, and it's very easy to skip requirements or to skip some parts or to overlook some parts. So what the validation service does with the third column, the normative IFC rules, is going through the documentation to find all these informal conditions, these sentences that requires the IFC file to be in a certain way or to comply to a certain rule. And it's a simply text, and we enforce this text into a rule. So these normative IFC rules are equally normative, that's why the name, but they are written in the documentation. They are not written into the schema, and so they are more difficult to check. And the major step ahead of the validation service is that we are taking these piece of text, we are turning them into rules, and we are checking them. And the technology that we're using to do that is Gherkin and Python Behave. So it's, again, I won't be long, but it's technology using these given then paradigma. So given there is this, given there is this entity, given there is this attribute, then something else should happen. So we write rules in this form, and then we use the Gherkin technology and the Python Behave to check these against the IFC file. This same technology, the Gherkin and the Python Behave, is used for both the normative IFC rules and the industry practices. What's the difference between these two? The first three columns are normative. So if a file fails on any of these three, the file is not valid. It's not a valid IFC. Industry practices are, you can call them common patterns or common requirements or sensible defaults, something that we look for into the file. If we find something strange, we raise an error, but it's not wrong because it's not infringing any of those three before. So it's not a step error, it's not a schema error, and it's not a violation of a normative rule. It's just something strange in the file, and we flag an error, but it doesn't make the file invalid. That's the most important thing. It's easier to understand this with the examples. I'm gonna quickly go through the demo, but just keep in mind, the main takeaway is the first three columns are normative. If you get a red mark on the first three columns, the file is invalid. The fourth one is a nice to have, okay? And it's a best practice. I'll skip completely the software architecture. Unless you have any question, let me know in the chat. But here you can find the link to the repositories that compose the IFC validation service. So it's a complex tool. It's made of submodules. The main interest is this /validate, which basically is the main module, and then there are sub-modules. The IFC Gherkin rules is where we keep all the normative rules and the industry best practices. The IFC validation data model speaks for itself. It's the data model, and the step file parser is the one that is responsible of checking the step syntax. Another question you might have at this point, or at least I was asked to spend some words on this, is why the IFC validation service? Well, I think you probably understood it by now. It's because Building Smart was asked to express a judgment on the IFC file. So there was a need for a trusted third-party judgment of IFC files provided by end users. And if we break it down the sentence, you understand the importance of this. Trusted third party means that it's not one vendor or the other saying your file is wrong or your tool is wrong because cannot read my file. This blame game, as the teacher says, is not good. It's not helpful. So we want to stop this blame game, and the only way to do that is by Building Smart being the third party, above all, referee that looks at the IFC file. That's the second part. So we look at the IFC files. We don't look at the tools. We look at the outcome of the tools. We don't look at prototype tools. We look at commercially available tools used by real users in real projects, in real scenarios, using, again, commercially available tools. And then they generate an IFC file. And then we look into the IFC files. And then we make a judgment of the IFC file. And the ultimate goal is really to serve the industry. So these files comes from you, from the user. So the only way we can contribute to quality assurance, reduce errors, enhance interoperability, and then ultimately also have some metrics for compliance and certification, that it's only because we get files from users and we help users to understand if their file is wrong or which tool can better perform under a certain part of the IFC. I try to summarize some key takeaways for this part. So you probably understood by now that the IFC validation service is a very promising platform. It is very high in the priority of Building Smart. It has a strategic role. It's going to be used also for one of the 2 tracks of software certification. And also for this reason has to be fully transparent, 100% open source. Its key role is really to ensure that an IFC file adhere to the IFC standard, no more, no less, does not check case-specific requirements, and hopefully, as a result, it promotes interoperability between software applications. Important disclaimer, it's currently in beta version and requires resources to grow and to exit this beta phase. So that was a quick high-level introduction of the IFC validation service. Again, I just need you to have enough information to understand the examples. Let me know, and probably I'll pause here for questions on this first part before we go into the role of the validation service in the openBIM workflow.
Do you have any question, David?
Yes, well, because I've received even through WhatsApp some questions, but in general, and I try to synthesize, let's say, that most of the questions are about, but maybe it's what you will cover through the next slides, about understanding the reports. Let's say, understanding why when there's a wrong, understanding what's that wrong, because sometimes it's difficult for, well, maybe not some specific users, but the most of users, they are struggling to understand the current way how the report show that your file is wrong against the schema, let's say.
Okay, I'll be quick. I'll try to get to the demo because it's better to explain this through examples.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, at the moment.
Okay, cool. So if the evaluation service overview is clear, I'll quickly go through the role of of the evaluation service in the openBIM workflow, starting with my view, which probably you came across because recently Building published a blog post, an article that actually started from an email that I sent internally to one of our colleagues, and then we made an article out of it. Turned out to be the second most clicked post on LinkedIn from Building. So that means that this openBIM workflow is really becoming a buzzword. And when this happens, I don't like it. I don't like confusing things. So I like to help people understanding the core messages. And the core message of the openBIM workflow is here you have a QR code to go through to read the full article. But the gist of the article is the openBIM workflow is a nice marketing terminology, but doesn't exist. There is not one workflow. There are many workflows, and every workflow that use one or multiple of the IFC solutions and services, you can call it an IFC workflow. So the main argument is this is the evidence. This is coming from a workshop that we did in US, in Denver, a couple of months ago. And as you can see, this is already different than the picture that David showed at the beginning. And it's not that this is right and that is wrong. It's just what I meant. There is not one workflow, and you can use the standards and solutions of Building Smart in different parts of your workflow. Every year, we receive tons of submission for the awards from very good companies that are using our solutions and standard in a very articulated way. Any of that is an openBIM workflow. So there is not one thing. I'm sorry, the one and only solution doesn't exist. There's not a simple answer. Excuse me, but hopefully you get the point. So probably the main takeaway is that the IFC validation service, of which I strongly encourage all of you to scan this QR code, go to the main page, because this is the main landing page of the validation service. It explains probably better than I did what the validation service is and what it does. And there's also very nice FAQ, growing FAQ. Sorry, David. So you might have to, from time to time, to translate everything back to Spanish, but it's a growing list of FAQ. Every time I receive questions from users, when I receive a question 2 times, I turn it into an FAQ. So this is a page you need to keep an eye on. This explains what the evaluation service is. And in that page, at the end, there are some FAQ. One of the FAQ is what is the recommended workflow for the validation service. I'll save you from reading all the text. The answer is this one. So you understood by now that the validation service check an IFC file against the standard, regardless, allow me to say, regardless the content, the case-specific content of the file, okay? So a reasonable point to use the validation service is really as soon as you have an IFC file, before performing any other validation, like your case-specific validation, maybe with IDS, or some geometric validation, or some human-based validation, you open your file and you try to look around, or maybe you have one of those great tools like Solibri or BIM Lab, and then you can run your queries and your rules, fine. But all those things and all those tools work only if the IFC file is structured correctly. So this is where the validation service sits, really in between the creation of the IFC model and anything else, okay? Because if a file doesn't pass the first 3 columns, remember that. If a file doesn't pass the first 3 columns of the validation service, it's not a legitimate IFC file. Okay, promise to be quick. I was quick. Any questions on this?
Not on this, but there's one question. I don't know if you will want to cover it maybe later, but I will read it, okay?
Yeah.
It comes from Celia, and she says, can IFC be adapted or replaced to better meet future requirements such as integration with smart city systems? I can read it again. Can IFC be adapted or replaced to better meet future requirements such as integration with smart city systems?
I think I understand the question, but I don't know the answer because I don't know the requirements of smart city domain. IFC is a fairly generic standard, can be adopted in many use cases, maybe even in the smart city ones, but without knowing the requirements, I cannot tell for sure if it's fit for purpose or not. It's a good question though, but probably again, it's better to take it offline. It requires a more comprehensive knowledge, which I don't have at the moment. Validation service status and roadmap. It's currently in version 6.8, so still in beta. If you scan the QR code, you get redirected to the page of the BSI forums where we publish all the release notes. And if you activate the bell icon, you will get a notification every time there is an update of the validation service. So quite useful. Make sure to do that. By the way, if you can't manage to scan all the QR codes and the links that I put in the chat, don't worry, the presentation will be made available, okay? Rules progress. Again, you probably now recognize the 4 columns. Syntax and schema are fairly complete. We think they are very mature in terms of what we check about syntax and schema. We have 46 normative rules. We believe maturity is around 100 rules, we believe. So we're still not there, but let's say we already passed the half. And then best practices, we have now 7 best practices, 7 industry best practices, but we don't believe we need to get to 100. So probably, I don't know, 10, 20 is a good number. And again, these are not normative things. Okay, so these are more warnings that helps the users or the software vendors that produce the file to understand something more about the file. Okay. If you want to know what these rules are, again, you can scan the QR code, you get redirected to the GitHub repository of the validation service called IFC Gherkin rules. If you remember, these are the rules that are developed using the IFC Gherkin technologies, and these cover the last 2 columns, the normative IFC rules and the industry best practice. And every one of those files that you can see, starting with the 3-letter, 3 numbers code, ALA1, ALB4, and all those things ending in .feature, all those things are rules. So each one of them is one rule, and then each of these is checked against the IFC file. A plan, again, I don't want to spend much time on this unless you have questions. Now we are focusing on creating more rules to make the service more mature. Immediately after, we will keep on adding rules to make the service complete. We will work also on some additional industry practice checks. At the moment, we only have 7. We want to grow them a little bit. We were thinking about working on performances, but maybe we will push them to later, and we will anticipate something about file authenticity. This involves digital signatures with software vendors, a topic that can last for 20 minutes. So unless you have a question, I'll skip that. But then you see on the right, maybe to keep in the back of your mind, the things that we have in the roadmap, but again, for which at the moment we don't have the resources to work on. It's an API interface, the ability for the validation service to run offline, so you don't have to upload the file online. You can run the validation service offline. It's quite convenient and very requested feature. Valid IFC file certificate. This basically means Building Smart, when your file is complete and fully valid, digitally signs your file and tells that it's 100% valid, and you can download the file with a certificate. This will be a paid feature. As I said, IDS audit is in the roadmap, so including IDS audit, not IDS check against IFC file. Remember the difference, but checking an IDS file against its schema, and also some dashboard for company or project-specific metrics. This is more dashboarding feature for visualization, but some of the users also requested this. This more or less is the plan. Again, you see that there are no dates because, as I said, resources are limited and we can't commit on a date, but more or less you have an idea of what we have in our roadmap. It's good to mention that if any of you is interested in supporting the validation service, the validation service itself is one of the strategic projects of Building Smart. I'll make it short. Strategic projects are indeed project oversees by the Central Management Office of Building Smart, and these projects are indeed strategic, and we are requiring funding to promote these. This includes certification, software certification, professional certification, BSD, IFC5. All of these are strategic projects. If you scan the QR code, you will land on the IFC Validation Service strategic project page, which tells you basically what I just told you. What's the roadmap and how you can contribute to the roadmap for this or that feature. Finally, any questions on all of that we said today before we're getting into the demo?
There are no questions, Evandro, so far. I think that people is waiting for this demo.
Yeah. Okay, so two things. First, I prepared a couple of examples, two examples of schema violations, 4 normative IFC rule violations, and 4 industry best practices violation. I left out the syntax part because I don't think it's interesting. If you want, I can make an example now. You know how an IFC file looks like? It looks like this. It's not the most sexy thing, okay? So let's imagine that you forget to close a parenthesis or you forget the semicolon at the end. This is a syntax error. Again, we don't see many syntax errors because you really have to develop a bad application to generate syntax errors. So we check them, but we don't get them that often. It's mainly schema, normative rules, and industry best practices. Another disclaimer is that to do that, I use some of the files that I had in my folder, and also some of the files that some of you submitted to the chapter. So first of all, thank you in advance for this, and don't worry, I intentionally left out all the author and file names because I don't want to blame anybody. Trust me, almost every IFC file has errors, and I just want to focus on the errors. And if you have specific files that generate specific errors, I think at the beginning of these slides, there is my contact. You can get in touch. And at the end of these slides, I'll tell you how to get in touch with the validation service team to get further support. But hopefully today you will learn a little bit more about these errors. Even though I know that it was a question before, so I have to warn you. The IFC file is a complex, sometimes too complex data exchange standard. To understand the errors, it really requires a deep to very deep knowledge of IFC. Okay, I myself sometimes struggle to understand the errors. This is just to say, sometimes I discover things about IFC that I didn't know that they existed. And I'm pretty sure that also some vendors didn't know that these existed until some service, like the validation service, came into the game and started shooting errors and finding errors in thousands of lines of IFC. So don't worry if some of the errors are not 100% clear. These are really deep technical stuff that most of the end users, they give it for granted or they don't know they exist. Okay, so with this disclaimer in mind, let me just give you an example of a schema violation. So on the right, let me try to have a pointer here. Laser pointer. Okay, so on the right, you have the report of a schema error. So well, first, the second column. Okay, and the errors is saying there is a rule IFC derived unit dot WR1 error, whatever that means, on this entity, this IFC derived unit number 72 with the message that it's difficult to understand if you're not a software programmer. So let me break it down for you so you hopefully understand the concept. So the key word probably here, what I usually do when I get these type of errors and I don't understand is I start looking for IFC derived unit WR1. So IFC derived unit is an entity, is a class in IFC, in the IFC schema that allows you to define derived unit. So not primary unit, okay? Like Pascal, which is, if I'm not mistaken, Newton over square meter. Sorry, okay. This is the architect coming out. So it's a derived unit. And there is a rule in the schema. In this time we are talking into the schema. This rule is embedded into the schema that says if you go to the IFC derived unit documentation, in the official documentation, there is something called formal propositions that tells units as such shall not be redefined as derived units. Okay, what this means is that the unit cannot reference itself. So if it's a derived unit, should be derived, so it should be composed of multiple units, or its exponent should be different than one, because maybe it's squared meters, so the exponent it's different than one. In this case, the derived unit sound pressure unit, which is the one here, 955, okay, is defined as Pascal pressure unit with an exponent of 1, which is not the case of Pascal because it's not a monodimensional unit. So there is an error in how this unit is defined and exported in IFC file. Now, this is a good example because most likely this is a problem, an error that is generated. Again, I don't know the file, I don't know the tool, but this is an error that is generated by the implementation of the vendor. You as a user, you can't do nothing in this case. In this case, someone, when implemented IFC for this tool, didn't understand how derived unit works in IFC. So you will, if there is a wrong implementation, regardless the user, you will always get a wrong derived unit here. Okay, so there are certain errors that you as a user cannot fix. That's one major takeaway. Some of the errors you can do something about it, you can fix them. Some of the errors you can't fix them because it requires an update of the software implementation. And this is probably one good example. And hopefully you are also understanding how difficult it is. First of all, how difficult is the IFC standard, and how sometimes even good vendors may overlook certain parts of the schema. Again, another schema violation. This is again there is a rule-IFC representation WR24. I made the job for you. I went to the IFC shape representation types, which is not an entity, but it's a rule in IFC. We are getting complicated, but hopefully you understand that schema, the IFC schema is a very complicated beast. There is a rule in the IFC schema, so embedded in the IFC schema, that basically checks all the shape representations that you've used and compare them with the IFC entity. The example is, if you say that your shape representation is a line, okay, then there is a rule that checks that the instance to use to represent this line is an IFC line, okay, because you can use something else. So there is this check embedded in the schema. In this case, there was an entity called IFC Boolean result, okay, and the type was clipping. Okay, so the shape representation was of type clipping, okay? But there is a rule that says that when the type is clipping, the entity that you use to represent the clipping should be either an IFC CSG solid or an IFC Boolean clipping result. One of these two is allowed as a shape representation for something that is tagged as clipping. Here, there is an IFC Boolean result, which is not an IFC Boolean clipping result. It's a different entity, okay? Again, very deep nested schema error that most likely you as a user can't do anything about this, because this is how this specific software is doing clipping operation, and it's using the wrong entity to represent clipping operation. I know that what I'm saying can be frustrating or disappointing, but I want you to understand how deep and technical these issues are and how they are not always the user's fault. Sometimes, let's say half and half. Let's see if we have another example. This may be a good example of something that is more of a user fault. Now we're stepping into the IFC normative rule violation. So there is a normative rule called IFC 102 that is basically checking for the absence of deprecated entities. So, in different versions of the schema, certain entities might be deprecated, which means they should not be used anymore because they've been replaced or they will be replaced in future release. So you should not have a file exporting those entities because they are deprecated. In this case, there was a file for IFC 2x3 using pset droughting, whatever it is. This pset is deprecated, so shall not be in the file. And this file was using this pset hundreds of times. In this case, it might be, again, you can argue that the software vendor should exclude or should prevent the user to use invalid pset. That's a discussion we can have. But in the end, the user, in this case, may choose to use a different pset or not use this one because it's deprecated. So this is, let's say, half and half responsibility. Another example of normative rule violation. Oh, that's another good one. Same rule, but something maybe closer to you that you understand. There is an entity in the IFC schema called IFC building story, and this entity has a deprecated attribute at the end, the elevation. So you should not use the elevation. You should do something else. In this case, we found a file with an elevation, and this attribute shall not be used. So this while evaluation service is throwing error. Now I have a couple more examples, but I'm also looking at the clock. We are 10:54. Apologies for that. I've been probably too long. What do you want me to do? Because I still have a few examples, but I don't want to run late on this webinar. Sorry?
You can continue, Evandro. I think it's no problem if it takes 10 minutes or 15 minutes more than expected previously. So I think that really the better part is this part. So to
Okay.
show all the examples that you could. So
Okay.
no worries
Okay.
to take more time than expected.
Okay. Sorry. Apologies for that.
No worries.
Another normative rule violation. This is something that you might get quite often. There is a rule called PSE001 that is basically checking that you're using the pset correctly. So that, for example, the pset prefix is reserved for IFC, or that if you have a pset wall common, you don't attach pset wall common to a beam. Okay, this will be a violation. Okay, so in this case, there was a pset wall common with the should have used one of these two properties, layer, name, or color, and we found a property called blue. So this is someone that I don't know why. Maybe a certain tool allows the user to do that, but in this case, the user had the property called blue into an IFC property set pset wall common. So this is a property that it's invented, doesn't exist, and it's squeezed into a standard pset. And of course, this is not doable. You can't do that. Okay. I will skip this one also because this rule is deactivated now, but I just want to mention that we also do quite detailed geometrical check. So in this case, we are checking that when you define a face or when a face is defined, there are no nodes, topological nodes, no overlapping nodes. And this goes as far as single point touching things. So this thing is not allowed in IFC. In the geometric kernel of IFC, this is not allowed because this is a topological node and you can't have that. So you have to have something like this. You can have all the open, all the closed faces without nodes, but everything with a node is not accepted. So again, this is a deep technical geometric check that we are also doing. Again, the responsibility here is probably half vendors, half user, because user can really mess it up with geometry sometimes. And then a few examples on the industry best practice warning. Again, these are also quite specific. For example, there is this one rule on the geometric subcontext that is checking that when you define a geometric context in IFC, and probably for many of you, this doesn't mean anything, but when you create an IFC, there is a geometric context, and then all the subcontexts that are used for the plan view or the 3D view or the graph view or whatever a certain tool wants to support. But sometimes these subcontexts are not defined, and this makes the geometry of the IFC file ambiguous because there is an information missing. Again, most of the users don't care about these things, but these are the things that may cause issues when a certain importing application tries to consume an IFC file. They have missing information, they don't know how to interpret the file, and so they invent. Okay, and this might be the reason of some errors. Another best practice is the project presence. You know, the IFC standard does not mandate the presence of an IFC project entity. So you can have an IFC file without an IFC project. But here we're raising a warning saying, hey, we know that by schema and by standard, you are not forced to have an IFC project because you can have a file for an IFC project library. But if there is a project missing, then might be a problem. Something specific to alignment, this is another industry practice example. If we find an alignment, most likely we would like to find reference because it's very strange to find an alignment without the stationing. It might be the case, maybe you want to exchange an alignment just as a poly curve for whichever use case and reason. So again, it's not wrong, but when we observe an alignment without not even one stationing along it, we flag it as an error. Okay. Oh, sorry, we flag it as a warning, an industry best practice warning. Okay, it's not the file is not invalid here. Another geometric check, we check the continuity of segments of alignment. You know, alignments is defined by segments, and some of these segments might not be continuous with each other, might not be attached to a certain tolerance. So we look at the file, we look at the tolerance, we made the calculations, and we tell you if the segments are continuous. Again, it's not wrong by the standard, but it's something that we are raising a warning for. So this is a list of examples. I know that they might sound scary or too complicated. Hopefully they helped you a little bit to understand how deep these checks are. But in any case, if you're using a validation service and you have any issue, you can always write an email to validate.buildingsmart.org that you see on the top of the page. And I will be really grateful if you can share your feedback. You know, there is a pop-up on the right. It's really 3 questions, takes you 10 seconds. And for you to share the feedback with the team about the validation service, what we are doing better, what we can improve. So that's it mainly. I think I have one question at this point, which is, now that you've seen all these and hopefully understood what's the scope of the validation service, if you have a suggestion for something that we should be checking and we are not checking, either now or in the future, I'd like to know that. And then I have a little test, but I don't know if we have time. I'd like to take more time for a question than for this little test. So I don't know if there are any questions, David.
Well, I had one because there were no questions at the moment. So, and I don't know if it's related to this last suggestion of yours, but what about, let's say, because in the beginning you mentioned commercial applications or apps, let's say, or software. I understood that from the point of view of what we are using in a practical way in our daily workflows. But what about, let's say, that the rising number of non-commercial or even user-created apps, you know, that people is even doing. And what happened with the IFCs that they create, especially taking into account that thing called implementation agreements, let's say, for example, there should be at least one IFC building instance within that, because sometimes we receive some files that are made by some unknown apps and so on. They build something, there's an IFC, you receive that, and you even know that that's not usual, but maybe it's correct or not. So is that a good use case for the use of validation service as well? Or we should not rely if we already know that the source of the authoring tool, it's something that it's unknown, or what are your thoughts about that?
Good question. I'll flip it to answer, because there are two parts. So first of all,
Okay.
I want to make it clear, the validation service check the IFC file. So check everything that ends with .ifc. So if you upload anything that ends with .ifc, it's checked by the validation service. We don't care if it's coming from a commercial app or the app that you develop on your own. We don't care. Okay, we check everything. So this is to say everybody can check anything. But if something is failing the syntax, the schema, and the normative rules, it's not an IFC. So it doesn't matter if it comes from a famous tool or from something that has been developed. If there is an agreement between me and you to implement, I don't know, an IFC building story in a certain way, and then we agree between me and you, and we create an IFC with our application, and then we call it .ifc. When we upload this file on the validation service, this file fails, because indeed it's not an IFC. Is the Evandro and David agreement on IFC. So yes, the validation service is the only, I would say, tool that can tell you if a .ifc file is a valid IFC file, regardless which application produced that. The only downside of using files produced by a known application is that if you have a problem or if you have a question, you don't know who to ask to, because you don't know where this file is coming from. Might be a very good file or a bad file, but you don't know the author, so you might have problems. But we as a validation service, we don't have problems. We take everything.
Okay, thanks, Evandro. There are a couple of questions here. One is from Jose Carlos Lino. He says, "Great, so clear, thank you. Are you passing these results to the software vendors? What has been their feedback and attitude on that?"
Very good question. The software vendors requested Building Smart to develop the validation service precisely to stop this blame game. You know, the famous scenario where I'm using a tool, I produce an IFC file, I give it to you because you're using another tool, you try to import it and it doesn't work. And then we start blaming each other or blaming each other's tool for not being able to handle IFC. So the software vendors came to Building Smart and say, hey, we need to stop this. You need to say something about when an IFC file is valid or not. So the software vendors are very supportive of the IFC validation service, first of all. They are using it to debug their implementation. So when they create or they update their implementation, they're using the validation service to make sure that they're creating a valid IFC file. Again, it's a huge complex schema, and even the best vendor might have problems understanding it. So the validation service is a great tool. They're using it every day. We are not, there was a part of the question, we are not passing results to vendors because we cannot. Because to pass results, we would have need to share your file and your information, and we cannot do that. What we can do is that when we observe that there is a recurring type of error with a certain type of application, we of course get in touch with the vendors and say, hey, your users are constantly getting the derived unit wrong. We can't share the file. We can, if you want, we can put you in contact with the users, but do something about it. So there is a conversation going on. And lastly, all these details and metrics of the failing files will be used for the software certification. So the vendor will know if there's something in their implementation that is consistently wrong.
So, Evandro, let me ask you one thing very related to that question of Jose Carlos Lino. So, is Building Smart International collecting all the errors and mistakes in order to create a kind of list of the most common or most popular mistakes and a set of recommendations? So, not related exactly to a specific software vendor. So, but maybe that list of most common or most popular errors, some will be related to software vendors, other will be related to users. So I don't know if you are collecting that information, but I think that it will be very useful in order to improve the quality of IFC in the future.
Yes, good question. And the answer is absolutely yes. We are collecting the validation outcomes. That's how we call it. So all the results of checking files. And then based on the outcomes, we can derive metrics or information. So yes, we can tell which is the most recurring error. We're not confident doing yet this because the service is still in beta version and we are developing rules every month. So only when the service is mature and it goes in, let's say, in 1.0, then we can say something about the metrics. Because now we are checking something today and tomorrow we are checking something else. And so we get less results, but that doesn't mean that the error is less present. Simply we started later to check it. So we can do that and we will do that, but simply, not now, probably next year when the validation service goes out of the beta version.
Okay, good to hear that. And we have a question from Lorena Martin. It's more a comment than a question. So she says that they have problems with large files. So I don't know if depending of the size of the IFC file, there are some kind of limitation or problems with the service.
Okay, I don't know what problems. Thank you for the question. I don't know what problems they are experiencing specifically, but as it's written in the FAQ, so if you go into the FAQ, at the moment to guarantee performances and to maintain the service available for everybody, there is a limit on the number of the file size that you can upload online. I think it's 256 megabyte. But if you go in through the FAQ of the official IFC validation service webpage, you will find the answers and all the options that you have for checking bigger files.
Okay.
Of course, bigger files, even now, even if it's under 200, bigger files take longer to validate.
Thank you. I think we don't have more questions at the moment.
Yeah, no more questions. So maybe you have 1 minute or two for this learning test, Evandro, or
Yeah, it's just a funny way to conclude this because I want to really make sure that the scope of the validation service is clear. So I made this example to basically ask you, I know that you can talk or maybe you can type in the chat, but imagine that I receive a file with one object like the one on the left. Okay, this, I don't know, cylindrical object extruded, I don't know. It's a .ifc. I received it in the validation service, and there is an IFC file with this geometry telling me that this is an IFC pipe. Is it a valid or invalid IFC file? Give you a couple of seconds. For us, is a valid IFC file. Okay, there is some geometry. As long as it's closed, remember all the things that we've said. As long as it's closed, as long as there are no nodes, as long as everything complies to the standard, it's called IFC pipe. Who cares? What if it's an IFC beam? Same story. It's fine. What if it's an IFC railing?
same.
Very similar. What if it's an IFC person?
No representation.
Exactly. IFC persons in IFC cannot have shape representation, so cannot be a person. But what if it's an IFC asset?
Could be in the end, because it's grouping some geometry that it's based on another class.
Yeah, that was a tricky question. So
It's a tricky one, yeah.
it's a tricky one. So if there's only an IFC asset, so if there is something else, and
You're
then
right.
there is an IFC asset, yes, you're right. You can have an IFC asset grouping an IFC BIM, okay? But if there is only an IFC asset, strictly only IFC asset, it's wrong because IFC assets cannot have representation. What if it's an IFC door?
Tricky one.
We don't again, this is how usually this helps people understanding where the validation service stops. When I say we don't care about the content, this is what I mean. Okay, as long as the geometry is fine, as long as you are not violating the standard or the specification, if you have a door that looks like this, for us it's fine. Sorry, this was just a strong statement in the end to make sure that people understand what's the scope of the validation service. And I think that was really the last slide. You have my contact, my emails, and I apologize for taking 13 extra minutes.
Not at all. Fantastic.
No worries for that. I think that it's better to give more time to explain more examples and to answer all the questions. So I want to thanks to some people who have shared with us some models in order to make this presentation. So I remember from ETS, from Marco Pizarro, and from Mostostal. So thanks all of you for sharing your models. Are be useful in order to create this presentation. And as Evandro says, don't hesitate to contact the service if you have any kind of question or suggestion or proposal related of the service. So Evandro, do you want to tell something, Mark, to close your webinar?
No, just thanks everybody who submitted the file. It helped me a lot to create the presentation. So thank you again. And please really use those the feedback and the validate at Building Smart to get in touch with the team if you have any issues, and especially look at the FAQ of the validation service, because this is a growing thing. If you think there is an FAQ missing, if you think there is an information that the user should have and it's not written there, get in touch. I'm happy to write a new FAQ and add it to the list.
Okay. So, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Muchas gracias a todos por asistir y nos vemos ya en el próximo webinar en el 2025. Thank you. Bye.
See you.
Bye bye. Gracias. Adiós.